Colleagues from Georgia and California want to speak on voting rights? No. No, thank you. I'm sure the senators from New Jersey and Connecticut are very grateful as well. I'll be brief. I move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar 64.
Questions on the motion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes appears to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion's agreed to. Clerk will report the motion. Nomination.
Nomination, Department of Education, James Richard Gavall of Massachusetts to be Undersecretary.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
Clerk will report the motion.
Cloture motion, we the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Executive Calendar Number 64, James Richard Gavall of Massachusetts to be Undersecretary of Education, signed by 18 senators as follows.
I ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I move to proceed to legislative session.
Questions on the motion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. The ayes appears to have it. The ayes do have it.
I move to proceed.
Motion's agreed to.
I move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar 252.
Questions on the motion? All in favor say aye. Any
Aye.
opposed, nay. The ayes appears to have it. The ayes do have it. Clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, the Judiciary, David G. Estudillo of Washington to be United States District Judge for the Western District of Washington.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
Clerk will report the motion.
Cloture motion, we the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Executive Calendar Number 252, David G. Estudillo of Washington to be United States District Judge for the Western District of Washington, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I move to proceed to legislative session.
Questions on the motion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. The ayes appears to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion's agreed to.
I move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar 260.
Is there objection? Oh, the question's on the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion's agreed to. Clerk, report the nomination.
Nomination of the Judiciary, Angel Kelly of Massachusetts to be United States District Judge for the District of Massachusetts.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
Clerk will report the motion.
Cloture motion, we the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Executive Calendar Number 260, Angel Kelly of Massachusetts to be United States District Judge for the District of Massachusetts, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I move to proceed to legislative session.
Questions on the motion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion is agreed to.
I move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar 251.
Questions on the motion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion's agreed to. Clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, the Judiciary, Veronica S. Rossman of Colorado to be United States Circuit Judge for the 10th Circuit.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
Clerk will report the motion.
Cloture motion, we the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a closed debate on the nomination of Executive Calendar Number 251, Veronica S. Rossman of Colorado to be United States Circuit Judge for the 10th Circuit, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I move to proceed to legislative session.
The questions on the motion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to.
I move to proceed to calendar 77, S 2093.
Clerk will report the motion.
Okay. Motion to proceed to calendar number 77, S2093, a bill to expand Americans' access to the ballot box and so forth and for other purposes.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Executive Calendar Number 251, Veronica S. Rossman of Colorado to be United States Circuit Judge for the 10th Circuit, signed by 17 senators as follows. I
The clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Do hereby move to bring to a closed debate on the motion to proceed to calendar number 77, S2093, a bill to expand Americans' access to the ballot box, reduce the influence of big money in politics, strengthen ethics rules for public servants, and implement other anti-corruption measures for the purpose of fortifying our democracy and for other purposes, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
Finally, I ask unanimous consent that the mandatory quorum calls for the cloture motions filed today, August 11th, be waived.
Without objection.
I move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar 64. Oh, that's page 1. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President, I know the hour is late, but we have nearly 30 highly qualified foreign affairs and development nominees who are languishing on the Senate floor. We have to confirm these nominees to fully equip the United States to pursue our foreign policy objectives, and I'll be asking unanimous consent to confirm each one. My distinguished colleague from Connecticut, Senator Murphy, a member of the committee, is here to join with me in this effort. I know the presiding officer is also a distinguished member of the committee. In the nearly 30 years that I have been working on foreign policy, we have never faced such a confluence of global challenges: a once-in-a-century global pandemic, climate change threatening stability, health and safety across the world, fueling displacement and resource-driven conflicts, great power competition from an increasingly emboldened China and Russia. We have the tools to confront these challenges, to promote American values and interests around the world, to advance the safety, health, and economic well-being of all Americans. But we cannot do that when we do not have empowered diplomats and development professionals in place to do so. So I call on this body to confirm these nominees, all of whom the Foreign Relations Committee has moved with bipartisan support, to put the United States in the best position to advance our foreign policy, development, and national security priorities. I'm calling for confirmation of all of these nominees, those up for ambassadorships, senior State Department, and USAID positions. We need them in place. Now, the Trump administration had its first ambassador confirmed on day 62 of the Trump presidency. The Obama administration had its first ambassador confirmed at day 73. The George W. Bush administration had its first ambassador confirmed at day 75. For the Clinton administration, it was day 75. For the George H.W. Bush administration, it was day 83. We are now more than 200 days into the Biden administration, and as of this moment, there is not a single confirmed State Department country ambassador, not one. And going back 4 administrations, there is a precedent of moving a package of nominees before the August recess. Under George W. Bush, the Senate confirmed a package of 81 nominees. During the Obama administration, the Senate confirmed a package of 104 nominees. And during the Trump administration, we confirmed a package of 75 nominees. We should be ashamed of holding the record for the longest delay in fully equipping the State Department and USAID to pursue the foreign policy, development, and national security interests of the United States. Now, some members of this body call on one hand for assertive American leadership on the global stage, and at the same time, they hold up these critical positions. Many of these nominees are career diplomats, public service who have dedicated their lives to advancing U.S. interests. They served under the Trump administration in the same way they'll serve in the Biden administration on behalf of the American people. Many of my colleagues are rightly focused on effectively confronting Chinese malign influence. Well, a fundamentally critical element of confronting China is empowered leadership in our diplomatic corps across the world. So let me be clear. Holding up diplomats to posts across Africa and the Western Hemisphere is effectively ceding influence to China and actively undermining U.S. national security interests. I recently heard an anecdote from a diplomat in Cameroon. When he travels outside the capital city, Cameroonians will greet him with a ni hao, assuming that, excuse me, if he isn't Cameroonian, he must be Chinese. Meanwhile, we haven't had an American ambassador in Cameroon in more than a year, and the Foreign Relations Committee approved a career diplomat for the post by voice vote nearly a month ago. What could possibly be the rationale for holding him up? Lastly, look at the department itself. Critical leadership positions remain held up. Now, I know many of my colleagues have dedicated a significant amount of their time over the past few years to combating the flow of fentanyl into the United States. But here we have a hold on a career Foreign Service officer nominated to be the Assistant Secretary for International Narcotics and Law Enforcement, who would be leading the department's efforts to combat the flow of fentanyl. So which one do you want? The American people deserve better than this. Now, I know we're all tired of being here, and I want to salute and thank the the reading clerks, the parliamentarian, the Democrat and Republican staff who are still here. But we feel compelled to go through and ask UC for each of these nominees. They all deserve to be confirmed tonight. So let me start off. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to executive session to consider the following nomination. Calendar number 233, Larry Edward Andre Jr. of Texas, a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, to be Ambassador of the United States to Somalia. That the nomination be confirmed, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, that no further motions be in order. The nominations, that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action, and the Senate then resume legislative session.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, the senator from New Jersey, and indeed all of the senators in this chamber, know precisely why these nominees have not moved forward. And the reason is because the Biden administration is currently engaged in open defiance of the United States Congress and is doing so in a way that is working serious and material harm to United States national security. Over a year ago, in December of 2019, this Senate, and indeed the full Congress, passed legislation imposing strong sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline is a pipeline between Russia and Germany designed to carry natural gas. It's a deep-sea pipeline. Vladimir Putin desperately wants this pipeline completed. If the pipeline is completed, it will give billions of dollars to Putin to use for malign efforts in Europe and throughout the world. This Congress is overwhelmingly convinced that completing the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is terrible policy. It is bad for the United States, it is bad for Europe, and it is good for Russia and Putin. Accordingly, the Congress passed overwhelmingly bipartisan sanctions legislation that I authored, along with Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen, and that legislation proved tremendously successful. How successful was it? When the President signed it into law, if my memory serves correctly, at 7 p.m. on a Thursday, construction on the pipeline halted at 6:45 p.m. on that Thursday. 15 minutes before the sanctions went into law, they ceased building the pipeline. And for a year, the pipeline lay dormant. It lay as a hunk of metal at the bottom of the ocean. We had succeeded. Together, this body had won a bipartisan national security victory for the United States. Then in November of last year, Joe Biden was elected. When Joe Biden was elected, President Biden and his foreign policy team immediately began signaling weakness on Nord Stream 2 to Putin. And that signal was heard. Putin commenced preparatory efforts to begin building the pipeline again within days of the presidential election in November, and Russia began building the pipeline again in January, just days after Joe Biden was sworn in. existing laws that this body has passed, not once but twice, mandate sanctions to stop the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Unfortunately, the Biden administration decided to waive those sanctions. Waiving those sanctions, I believe, will prove to be a generational geopolitical mistake. If we continue on the current pace set out by President Biden, Putin will complete the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. If that happens, for decades, Putin and the next dictator in Russia and the next dictator in Russia will get billions of dollars every year from this pipeline. They will use it for military aggression. They will use it for spying on America. They will use it for attacking their enemies. Not only that, Europe will be captive to Russian natural gas. It will be subject to energy blackmail. We don't have to hypothesize this because Putin's demonstrated his willingness to use energy blackmail on Europe going forward. This undermines the interest of Europe. It undermines the interest of America. And by the way, it also hurts jobs in the United States of America. I've made clear to every State Department official, to every State Department nominee, that I will place holds on these nominees unless and until the Biden administration follows the law and stops this pipeline, imposes the sanctions. As the senator from New Jersey knows well, and he and I work together closely on these sanctions legislation that the Biden administration is refusing to follow, I have been negotiating with the Biden administration in good faith for months, laying out a path to move these nominees forward. But unfortunately, to date, President Biden has insisted on giving a multi-billion-dollar gift to Joe Biden, benefiting Russia, hurting America, and hurting our national security interests. That being said, there is a path where I would readily lift these holds. And it is a path I am in a moment going to propound a unanimous consent resolution, a unanimous consent request to take up and pass legislation that I've introduced that would impose the sanctions that are already required by law, but the Biden administration refuses to follow. This legislation is legislation that both of the Democratic members of the Foreign Relations Committee have voted for substantially similar legislation in the past. If this legislation passes the Senate, if it passes the House and is signed by the President, the day it is signed by the President, I will lift these holds. But given that the President and White House have indicated they intend to defy the law, I'm not going to lift the holds unless and until they relent in their effort to give this gift to Vladimir Putin. Accordingly, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of a bill at the desk that would require the imposition of sanctions with respect to Nord Stream 2. I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Mr. President.
Is there objection?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, and I'll be brief for the sake of everybody here. There's a lot more to be said, but look, first of all, this legislation was just introduced today. Today. Has not been brought before the committee. It's not had a full vetting, and it's not, I think, quite fair to say that it's exactly the same. It isn't. I was just looking through it. Secondly, I know that the senator believes that he can dictate to the President of the United States, who's duly elected by the American people, what the foreign policy should be. I believe we should have a role in foreign policy. I share that with the senator. But you can't say if it passes the Senate, if it passes the House, signed by the President, then I will release my hope. I mean, I guess that would be nice if the senator could accomplish it for his goals, but it's not the way the system ultimately works. And I would just say President Trump, for the longest period of time, did not issue the sanctions that were necessary because he was so cozy with Vladimir Putin, and the result was that the pipeline was almost finished by the time President Biden came to office. Had he done what the senator wishes, we wouldn't be in this position today. So for all of those reasons, I object to the senator's unanimous consent request.
Objection is heard. Is there objection to the request from the senator from New Jersey?
Reserving the right to object, I will respond briefly to the senator from New Jersey. The talking point from the Biden administration as to why they have given this gift to Vladimir Putin is they say the pipeline is almost complete. It is over 90% complete. The problem with that argument is it's demonstrably false because it was equally true in December of 2019. In December of 2019, the pipeline was over 90% true. And indeed, at that time, there was a massive Russian disinformation campaign throughout Europe where the Russian government was putting out, these sanctions will never pass, and if they pass, they will never work. Why? Because the pipeline is over 90% complete. Well, Mr. President, a pipeline that is 90% complete is a pipeline that is 0% complete. Until it is 100% complete, it transmits zero natural gas. The pipeline doesn't work until you finish it. And that Russian disinformation we discovered the day the sanction legislation was signed was exactly that, was utterly false nonsense. Why? Because the day it was signed, they stopped construction, and they stopped it for a year. And Putin only began construction after Joe Biden was elected, after he was sworn into office, and after his team indicated weakness that they wouldn't enforce the sanctions against Russia. So their talking point that it was 90% complete, that was true a year ago, and we knew we could stop it then. We can stop it now. The only reason Putin is building this pipeline is because the Biden administration is unwilling to stand up to Russia. Accordingly, I object.
President.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
The senator from New Jersey.
One thing that is demonstrably true is that Donald Trump did nothing as it relates towards this pipeline, and there wasn't much effort to try to get him to stop the pipeline at the time. And while I disagreed with President Trump on a whole host of foreign policy issues, I did not hold up all his nominees just to get my view to be the order of the day. Therefore, I ask that it be in order to make the same request that I made previously with respect to Executive Calendar number 234, Elizabeth Moore Albin, a career member of the Senate Senior Foreign Service, to be Ambassador of the United States to Algeria.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
The senator from Texas.
reserving the right to object, I would note, as the senator from New Jersey knows well, that I pressed President Trump vigorously on this topic, engaged aggressively with the Trump administration, with the Treasury Department, with the State Department, with the National Security Council, and we prevailed in those battles. The Trump administration issued a series of sanctions, and they worked. They stopped the pipeline. So I've demonstrated a perfect willingness to stand up to a president of my own party on this issue, and we succeeded in stopping the pipeline. Now, when there's a Democratic president, we have yet to see Democratic members of this body willing to stand up as vigorously to their own party's president, who is actively and eagerly facilitating the building of this pipeline. I object.
Objection is heard. The
Mr.
senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, thank you. I would just simply say that the senator from Texas did not hold up any of the nominees of President Trump as it relates to this. I ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to Executive Calendar 235, Maria E. Brewer, a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, to be Ambassador of the United States to the Kingdom of Lesotho.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
The senator from Texas.
reserving the right to object because it is a generational geopolitical mistake to give a multi-billion-dollar gift to Vladimir Putin to strengthen Russia and to undermine U.S. national security, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
The senator from New Jersey.
I ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to Executive Calendar 236, Christopher John Lamora, a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, to be Ambassador of the United States to Cameroon.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
The senator from Texas.
reserving the right to object because it is a massive strategic error, one that weakens our allies, that endangers our allies, and makes Russia more dangerous, more aggressive, more willing to attack and undermine U.S. national security, and because Joe Biden and the Biden administration is defying U.S. law passed with overwhelming bipartisan support from Congress, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
The senator from New Jersey.
I ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to Executive Calendar 237, Tulinabo S. Mushingi, a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, to be Ambassador of the United States to Angola and to serve concurrently as the Ambassador to the Democratic Republic of Sao Tome and Principe.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
The senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object because the Biden administration should not be given a massive multi-billion-dollar gift to Putin, strengthening Russia and weakening America and U.S. national security interests. I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
The senator from New Jersey.
I ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to Executive Calendar 238, Eugene S. Young, a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, to be Ambassador of the United States to the Republic of Congo.
Is there objection?
Mr.
The
President.
senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object because I think it is a generational mistake, one that will harm U.S. national security interests, will endanger U.S. servicemen and women, will weaken America, will weaken our allies, and will strengthen our enemies and our adversaries. Because I believe that Joe Biden giving a massive multi-billion-dollar gift to Vladimir Putin to make him stronger and more aggressive is enormously harmful to America. I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
The senator from New Jersey.
I ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to Executive Calendar 239, Michelle Jean Sison, a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, to be Assistant Secretary of State for International Organization Affairs.
Is there objection?
Mr.
The
President.
senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object because Joe Biden should not be giving a multi-billion-dollar gift to Vladimir Putin, strengthening Russia and undermining U.S. national security. I object.
Objection is heard. The senator
President.
from New Jersey.
Mr. President, here's one where it's a monumental mistake to not permit this person to be confirmed when we want to stop fentanyl from coming into our country. I ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to Executive Calendar 240, Todd D. Robinson of New Jersey, a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, to be Assistant Secretary of State for International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
The senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object because Joe Biden has made the decision to give a massive multi-billion-dollar gift to Vladimir Putin because that weakness towards Russia empowers our enemies, endangers our servicemen and women, weakens our national security, and destroys jobs here at home. I object.
Objection is heard. Senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, I ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to Executive Calendar 241, Daniel J. Creightonbrink, a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, to be the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object because Joe Biden should not be defying U.S. law, disregarding the overwhelming bipartisan consensus of both houses of Congress, because Joe Biden should not be giving a massive multi-billion-dollar gift to Vladimir Putin that constitutes unilateral surrender to Russia in a way that strengthens Russia, weakens America, and endangers our nation, undermining U.S. national security. I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
The senator from New Jersey.
I ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to Executive Calendar 317, Mark Evans Napper, a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, to be Ambassador of the United States to Vietnam, and that the senator from Texas remarks, which he has made repeatedly, be inserted each and every time after the motion that I've made.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object. I appreciate my friend from New Jersey's attempt to abbreviate this, and I'm endeavoring to be concise, but nonetheless lay out the factual predicate. Because it was a mistake for Joe Biden to give a multi-billion-dollar gift to Vladimir Putin, to disregard U.S. law, to weaken U.S. national security interests, and to strengthen Russia at our expense, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Jersey.
Now, here's one where we heard a lot, even during the debate we just had, about the United Nations and the need for reform. Well, here's an opportunity. I ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to Executive Calendar 318, Christopher P. Liu, to be representative of the United States of America to the United Nations for UN management and reform with the rank of ambassador.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
The senator from Texas.
reserving the right to object because Joe Biden's giving a multi-billion-dollar gift to Vladimir Putin in defiance of U.S. law, in contravention of the overwhelming bipartisan consensus of Congress, hurts America, strengthens Russia, and endangers the people of this nation. I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, I ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to Executive Calendar 319, Christopher P. Liu, to be an alternate representative of the United States of America to the sessions of the General Assembly of the United Nations.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
The senator from Texas.
reserving my right to object because Joe Biden's giving a multi-billion-dollar gift to Vladimir Putin weakens America, strengthens Russia, and endangers our national security. I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, I ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to Executive Calendar 320, Rufus Gifford, to be the Chief of Protocol with the rank of Ambassador.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
The senator from Texas.
reserving the right to object because it is a generational geopolitical mistake for Joe Biden to give a multi-billion-dollar gift to Vladimir Putin, because that mistake weakens America, strengthens Russia, and endangers our national security. I object.
Objection is heard. The senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, now, here's a generational mistake if we do not confirm the next person. We are in the midst, in Latin America and the Caribbean, of turmoil all around. We have the challenges of Venezuela, the Cuban people crying out for change, the situation in Haiti after the assassination, Nicaragua becoming a new dictatorship. We need to have the Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere be out there helping us in the hemisphere. So I ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to Executive Calendar 322, Brian A. Nichols, a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, to be Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
The senator from Utah.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, I can't agree to move forward with this nominee today. I think this is really unfortunate. We could have avoided this. This could have been avoided altogether if the Senate Foreign Relations Committee would simply disclose the responses to the questions for records to members directly. Then senators could review the nominees more quickly. Unfortunately, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee has refused to do that. And so I've been forced to go to the State Department to get that information. I received those responses on Monday evening. Just a few hours ago, I sent some additional questions to the nominee. They would have been easy to respond to. I still await those responses, and I expect that I will receive them soon. But until then, I can't do my job right. My advice and consent role can't adequately be performed without having the information. I'm not going to relinquish that duty to represent the people of Utah on all matters, and not just on those matters as to which I enjoy a seat on a committee. There is one type of constitutional amendment that is preemptively unconstitutional. All senators are equal. You can't treat them unequally. I deserve to have access to these answers, and they're not giving them to me. That is why we're here. That is why I can't agree to this tonight, and I'm not going to do that. And I'm not going to be bullied into it. They need to share this information. I therefore object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
The senator from New Jersey.
I don't get to serve on every committee, and I don't have the questions for the record of every committee hearing. Eventually, they get printed, and they are available to all senators. But the suggestion that the senator is being denied something when he is not a member of the committee is a unique one, to say the least. But nonetheless, I think there would have been another objection even if his interests were answered. I ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to Executive Calendar 323, Marcela Escobar, to be an Assistant Administrator of the United States Agency for International Development.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
The senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object, and I would note something to my friend from New Jersey. As the senator from New Jersey knows, with respect to the previous nominee, I do not have a hold on the previous nominee. I've lifted my hold pursuant to discussions and negotiations. The same is true with respect to former Senator Ken Salazar, who's been nominated to be ambassador to Mexico. My understanding is he's going to be confirmed momentarily. I don't have a hold, and I don't believe there are any other holds or blocks to his confirmation. So that will occur momentarily, and indeed there have been several other nominees at the State Department where I've lifted the holds in negotiations, including at the request of the senator from New Jersey. I have worked with my colleagues, but at the same time used the leverage that we have as senators to try to pressure the Biden administration to follow the law and to defend U.S. national security interest. With regard to this particular unanimous consent request, because Joe Biden's giving Vladimir Putin a multi-billion-dollar gift is a generational geopolitical mistake, because it strengthens Russia at the expense of America and it undermines U.S. national security interests, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from New
I ask that
Jersey.
it be in order to make the same request with respect to Executive Calendar 324, Monica P. Medina, to be the Assistant Secretary of State for Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs.
Is there objection? The senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object, because it is a generational geopolitical mistake for Joe Biden to give Vladimir Putin a multi-billion-dollar gift that will continue for decades into the future, because that mistake strengthens Russia at the expense of America and it undermines U.S. national security, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
The senator from New
Before
Jersey.
I yield finally to my colleague from Connecticut, a member of the committee, I just want to say that in 30 years of doing foreign policy between the House and the Senate, sitting on both the House and Senate Foreign Relations Committee, God forbid that something happens in one of these countries or in these regions, that we do not have a confirmed ambassador, assistant secretary of state, development official to promote our interests, to respond to it, to be able to deal with it. I wouldn't want to be the senator who held up that person when that happens at some part of the world. With that, I yield to the senator from Connecticut.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to continue to propound these unanimous consent requests in the same form as the chairman of the committee. But before I do, just a few brief remarks. I know the hour is late. First of all, it is wonderful to hear this revisionist history about the Trump administration's disposition towards Russia. Everybody knows what was going on. This was an administration that was practically sycophantish towards the Russian regime, refused over and over again to stand up in any meaningful way. That's why the pipeline got so far along. It was the 11th hour when the Trump administration at the very last minute decided to move forward on sanctions. And so we're not here to debate the merits of the Trump administration's decision-making on Russia policy, but suffice it to say, Russia did very well expanding its influence around the region during the 4 years that Donald Trump was in office. Second, the effect of holding up all of these nominees is to kneecap American national security. Never, ever before has a president had so few nominees confirmed to key national security posts than this president. It's never happened before. And it is true that there's a history in this body of individual senators placing a temporary hold on one or maybe two officials relevant to the policy over which they are having a disagreement with the administration. Probably many members of this body have done that. But at least in the time that I have been here, and from what I have heard, never before has an individual senator held up this many nominees for key national security posts over a disagreement on one specific policy. And if every single senator did that, because every senator here has a policy disagreement that they believe is significant with the Secretary of State, with the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, with the Secretary of Defense, then the business of nominations and confirmations would grind to an absolute halt in this body. I had deep disagreements with President Trump, but never did I endeavor to hold up every single nominee to State Department posts, because I came to the conclusion that that would do much, much more harm to American national security than whatever concession I might get from the administration would provide a benefit to American national security. And so I share this just really paralyzing fear that Senator Menendez expressed, that something awful is going to happen without the kind of personnel that every president needs on post to do the job. We could probably get by if this was a hold of 1 or 2 or 3 individuals. We're talking about dozens of key national security posts that are left vacant because of the decision of one senator. And so I will continue to propound these requests. I imagine the decision will not be different. I would ask that it be in order to make the same request as those that Senator Menendez was making with respect to Executive Calendar number 327, and A. Witkowski to be Assistant Secretary of State for Conflict and Stabilization Operations.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
The senator from Texas.
reserving the right to object. You know, the senator from Connecticut spoke of revisionist history, and perhaps it was fitting that he did so, because we proceeded to hear quite a bit of revisionist history. The unfortunate reality is the Democratic Party in this chamber has been reluctant to stand up to Russia and reluctant to stand up to the Soviet Union before that for decades. The Democratic Party consistently has embraced weakness on Russia and the Soviet Union. I'm old enough to remember President Barack Obama in a debate with Republican nominee Mitt Romney, when Mitt Romney said, we need to stand up to Russia, and President Obama turned to him and said, Mitt, the 1980s called and they want their foreign policy back, because the Democratic Party's position was weakness to Russia. I'm old enough to remember President Obama leading over to Medvedev, caught on a hot mic, saying, tell Vladimir, that would be Putin, I'll have more flexibility after the election. It was only when Donald Trump was elected that the Democratic Party suddenly discovered Russia as a menace. Now, I welcome that. I welcome that sudden discovery. I think Russia was a menace before and after. But for too many Senate Democrats, it's purely political. Russia, Russia, Russia was a stick to beat up on Donald Trump, and the substance of it didn't matter. And so the senator from Connecticut said, well, gosh, Donald Trump, he thinks, was terrible on Russia. Here is a simple fact. Under President Trump, we stopped the pipeline. The day this sanctions legislation was signed into law. Under President Biden, Putin began building the pipeline again. Those are facts. You want to talk about who's weak on Russia? Those are simple facts. And those facts are dangerous, because Joe Biden's giving a multi-billion-dollar gift to Vladimir Putin was a generational geopolitical mistake, because it strengthens Russia and it weakens America, because it endangers U.S. national security interests. I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
The senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, because American national security is gravely compromised by the inability of a president to have his national security team in place at a time of crisis, I would ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to Executive Calendar number 328, Anna Witkowski to be Coordinator for Reconstruction and Stabilization.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
The senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object. Just a few moments ago, the senator from Connecticut said something bad's going to happen. Let me tell you what. He's right. Something bad is going to happen, and there's a reason for it. The Biden foreign policy in just 7 months has been the most disastrous foreign policy we have seen of any administration since Jimmy Carter. To every enemy of America, they have projected weakness. On Russia, Joe Biden has given Vladimir Putin what he wanted most, a multi-billion-dollar pipeline to let him extort Europe. On China, the Biden administration has been projecting weakness over and over and over again, including kowtowing to China and reversing the State Department policy on Taiwan, prohibiting Taiwan from displaying their flag or wearing military uniforms on U.S. government property, kowtowing to the Communist Party in China. On Iran, the Biden administration has set as their top foreign policy objective sending billions of dollars to the Ayatollah Khamenei, even as he's the leading state sponsor of terrorism in the world and chants death to America. And on Hamas, the Biden administration has sent hundreds of millions of dollars to the Palestinian Authority, much of which has found its way to Hamas and has been materialized in rockets raining down on Israel. So is something bad going to happen? Yes, because when you show weakness to our enemies, it encourages our enemies and they get more and more aggressive. Where I differ with the senator from Connecticut is I don't think the way to avoid something bad is to keep showing weakness and give Putin what he wants. The way to stand up to our enemies is to demonstrate strength, not weakness. I believe in peace through strength, and I think appeasement invites conflict. Because Joe Biden's multi-billion-dollar gift to Vladimir Putin is a generational geopolitical mistake, because it strengthens Russia at the expense of America, and because it undermines U.S. national security interests, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
The senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, because every single day that the president doesn't have his team in place to protect this nation, our nation is under more serious threat. I ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to calendar number 329, Mary Catherine Fee, a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, to be a member of the Board of Directors of the African Development Foundation for a term expiring September 27th, 2026.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
The senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object, I would note one of the efforts that the State Department has endeavored to do to try to force these nominations through is planning a whole series of articles and papers which they somehow believed would pressure me. The most amusing of which was an article, I believe in Politico, if I remember correctly, that began ominously, "The mansions in Europe where our ambassadors reside are sadly empty due to this one senator's objections." I will confess my heart is not broken that some rich Democratic donor is not wining and dining people in a grand ambassadorial mansion. I'm sure that is an enormous crisis in Georgetown. What I think is a crisis is making Putin stronger and Russia stronger and weakening Europe, weakening our allies, and weakening America. And because Biden's multi-billion-dollar gift to Putin weakened America, strengthened Russia, and undermined our U.S. national security, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
The senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, because China is absolutely celebrating every single day that our corps of diplomats is dramatically and dangerously understaffed because of these holds on the president's nominees, I ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to executive calendar number 330, Mary Catherine Fee, a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, to be a member of the Board of Directors of the African Development Foundation for a term expiring September 27, 2021.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object, I would note there's some irony in the senator from Connecticut expressing his deep concern about China just an hour or two after this chamber voted on an amendment I introduced that said that we should not be importing electric vehicles that were made in China using slave labor in concentration camps. And the senator from Connecticut and every single Democratic senator, save one, voted to reject that amendment. The consequences of that, the Biden administration is preparing to import millions of dollars of electric vehicles that were built, or parts of them were built, using slave labor in concentration camps in China. You want to talk about what is encouraging, empowering the Chinese Communist regime? It is the willingness of the Democratic Party to overlook their murder, torture, and concentration camps because of their commitment to the Green New Deal. Because Joe Biden's giving a multi-billion-dollar gift to Vladimir Putin strengthened Russia at the expense of America, and it undermined U.S. national security interests, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, similarly, because without an ability to have U.S. diplomats on post, to have our most important leadership positions staffed, we make ourselves intentionally and deliberately unable to be able to manage crises across the world. I would ask that it be in order to make the same requests with respect to Executive Calendar 331, Mary Catherine Fee, career member of the Senior Foreign Service, to be Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object because Joe Biden's multi-billion-dollar gift of this pipeline in defiance of U.S. law and contravention of the overwhelming bipartisan consensus of Congress, because it strengthens Russia at the expense of America and it undermines U.S. national security, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, I would ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to Executive Calendar number 332, Lee Satterfield, to be Assistant Secretary of State for Educational and Cultural Affairs.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object because Joe Biden's multi-billion-dollar gift to Vladimir Putin is a generational geopolitical mistake that strengthens Russia at the expense of America and that undermines U.S. national security, I object.
Objection is heard. Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to Executive Calendar 333, Karen Donfried, to be Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs and Eurasian Affairs.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object because Joe Biden's multi-billion-dollar gift to Vladimir Putin is a generational geopolitical mistake, because it strengthens Russia at the expense of America and it undermines U.S. national security, I object.
Objection is heard. Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to Executive Calendar 334, Jessica Lewis, to be Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object because Joe Biden's multi-billion-dollar gift to Vladimir Putin is a generational geopolitical mistake, because it strengthens Russia at the expense of America and it undermines U.S. national security, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, I ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to Executive Calendar 335, Donald Liu, a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, to be Assistant Secretary of State for South Asian Affairs.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object because Joe Biden's multi-billion-dollar gift to Vladimir Putin is a generational geopolitical mistake, because it strengthens Russia at the expense of America and it undermines U.S. national security, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
The senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, I ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to Executive Calendar 336, Paloma Adams Allen, to be a Deputy Administrator of the United States Agency for International Development.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
The senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object because Joe Biden's multi-billion-dollar gift to Vladimir Putin is a generational geopolitical mistake, because it strengthens Russia at the expense of America and it undermines U.S. national security, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
The senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, I ask that it be in order to make the same request with respect to Executive Calendar 337, Isabel Coleman to be a Deputy Administrator of the United States Agency for International Development.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
The senator from Texas.
reserving the right to object because Joe Biden's multi-billion-dollar gift to Vladimir Putin is a generational geopolitical mistake because it strengthens Russia at the expense of America and it undermines U.S. national security. I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
The senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, I'm at the final unanimous consent request. I'll make it in a moment. Just to note, as we're wrapping up here, this has taken a while, and this list of pending nominees is going to grow. It's going to get longer and longer. There are going to be more key posts that are going to go unfilled. And I understand Senator Cruz's desire to use his power to hold these nominees in order to get a change in policy from this administration. I doubt that the administration, which has already set a clear direction, has executed an agreement with the Germans, is going to abide. My worry, though, is that this won't be the end, that this is not going to be the last foreign policy decision that Senator from Texas or other Republican senators disagree with, nor will it likely be the last decision that any high-profile cabinet member makes that finds disagreement from my Republican colleagues. And so I end where I began, which is to say that Senator Cruz and I have a difference of opinion with respect to Nord Stream and the gravity of the moment that we find ourselves in. But this place just becomes unworkable if every single senator holds up this many nominees over one particular policy disagreement. And this tactic will be utilized by Democrats when there's a Republican in the White House. It might not be me, because I find this objectionable, but it will be copied. And you will find the same thing happening to a Republican president, their administration grinding to a halt in whatever department finds itself the object of this tactic. And so I continue to express this deep worry about what it means to not have individuals in place in Somalia overseeing the Western Hemisphere, to not have someone overseeing our counter-narcotics operations, but this list will get longer and longer and longer, and the risk to American security will be greater. And again, I will just suggest that the harm being done here to U.S. security is much greater than the benefit that the senator believes will be gained through a negotiation over these posts with the administration. And so, at the risk of inspiring another very long speech from the senator from Texas, I make those remarks, and I ask finally that it be in order to make the same request as I have and Senator Menendez has with respect to Executive Calendar 150, Brett Holmgren to be Assistant Secretary of State for Intelligence and Research.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
The senator from Texas.
reserving the right to object. You know, the senator from Connecticut is correct that if a senator were to halt a large number of nominations for an idiosyncratic concern, for a concern unique to that senator that was not widely shared, that could constitute an abuse of power. And I'm going to suggest some aspects of this situation that make it quite different, and that in a subsequent administration, if there were a comparable situation, would make these same levers appropriate. Number one, the Biden administration is defying 3 separate federal laws. 2 different Nord Stream 2 sanctions, both of which I authored along with Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen, both of which passed the Senate and the House and were signed into law, both of which enjoyed massive, near unanimous bipartisan support. in addition to that, CAATSA, strong Russia sanctions that are mandatory, that are designed to force a president to sanction Russia, even if they're reluctant to do so, like Joe Biden is. Right now, the administration is defying the law. And so the message that I have conveyed to the administration repeatedly is follow the law. I'm not asking for a change in the law. I'm saying follow the law. That's number one, if you have an administration that is openly defying the law. But number two, that is openly defying an overwhelming bipartisan consensus of Congress. This is not a narrow partisan issue, and I would note, after Joe Biden waived the sanctions on Nord Stream 2, in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I introduced an amendment to reverse his decision. Every single senator but one on that committee voted in favor of my amendment. The senator from Connecticut voted in favor of my amendment. The senator from New Jersey voted in favor of my amendment. The Biden administration is telling all of Congress, essentially jump in a lake. We don't care that every Democrat and virtually every Republican has a dramatically different assessment of this situation than they do. Third, the national security magnitude of this issue. This was a major national security victory. When I met with the Biden administration, with each of their successive national security officials, I said, look, I understand the instinct of any new administration to say whatever the old guys did must be wrong. I get the Biden guys want to say whatever Trump did must be wrong. And by the way, the Trump guys, by and large, said whatever Obama did must be wrong. That's not a new thing. Whenever you have a change in administration, that tends to be a default position. But what I urge them to do is, just because that's your knee-jerk instinct, this was a massive bipartisan victory for America, a national security victory that we won, that Joe Biden is on the verge of throwing away. And the Secretary of State sat in my office and promised to fight to sanction Nord Stream 2. The Deputy Secretary of State sat in my office and promised to fight to sanction Nord Stream 2. The Undersecretary of State sat in my office and promised to fight to sanction Nord Stream 2. They did, in fact, fight to sanction Nord Stream 2, but unfortunately, they were overruled by the White House, which made a political decision to give in to Putin. In those circumstances, when you are defying explicit U.S. law, when you are defying the overwhelming bipartisan consensus of Congress, and when you are endangering U.S. national security and indeed turning a victory into a loss, I think it's appropriate to use the tools we have in front of us. That being said, I have engaged in active negotiation with the Biden administration. In the past week, I've had conversations on this topic with the Secretary of the Treasury, with the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, with the National Security Advisor. I've had conversations with multiple Democratic senators about a path forward. But I'll tell you what the path forward is not going to be. It's not going to be, let's roll over, give Putin his pipeline, and accept a massive national security loss for America. If that's where Joe Biden and Kamala Harris want to go, they can go there, but they're not going to go there with my acquiescence. And I'm going to use every tool I have as a senator elected by the people of Texas to prevent that outcome. Accordingly, because Joe Biden's decision to defy U.S. law, to defy the overwhelming bipartisan consensus of Congress, to surrender to Vladimir Putin, to give him his number one priority, a multi-billion-dollar pipeline that will provide billions of dollars of rewards for Russia for decades to come. Because that decision is a generational geopolitical mistake. On the order of magnitude of Jimmy Carter's giving away the Panama Canal. That even 50 years later, the consequences of that geopolitical mistake still reverberate. 50 years from now, Russian dictators will benefit from Joe Biden's weakness on Russia. Because that strengthens Russia, because it empowers Russia to attack our enemies, to extort our enemies, to engage in economic blackmail against our enemies, against our allies, rather. Because our allies are begging us not to do this. I've met with senior officials of the Ukraine. The Ukrainians are begging us not to do this, and the Biden White House is threatening Ukraine, keep your mouth shut, because we have a political objective here. Because that strengthens Russia at the expense of the United States, at the expense of Europe, at the expense of our allies, because it destroys jobs in America, and because it endangers U.S. national security. I emphatically object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
The senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, I understand the senator believes he has such a serious objection to administration policy that it merits this exceptional tactic. I would submit, as I move into closing business, that it is not the biggest disagreement that a senator has had with an administration. It is not the biggest disagreement that a group of senators has had with an administration. To believe that, I think, would be to elevate this dispute beyond its merits. Not to suggest it isn't significant, but it's not the most significant disagreement that an individual senator has ever had with an administration. What is exceptional is this tactic. Never before has a United States senator used their power in this way to hold up this many nominees at such a critical moment. That's what's exceptional. That's what makes this moment so dangerous. That's why Senator Menendez and I came down to the floor to try to unlock some of these nominees towards confirmation, because it is the tactic, not the disagreement, that is the exception. Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to executive session to consider the following nominations in block: calendars 268, 321, 189, 247, 267, 270, 344, 301, 295, 296, 297, 298, 299, that the Senate vote on the nominations en bloc without intervening action or debate. The motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, that any statements related to the nominations be printed in the record, that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action, and the Senate resume legislative session.
Is there objection? Without objection? The question concerns on nomination en bloc. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The nominations are confirmed.
Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of S-Res 353 submitted earlier today.
The clerk will report.
SRES 353 designating August 2021 as National Catfish Month.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'd ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of S-Res 354 submitted earlier today.
The clerk will report.
SRES 354 celebrating the 100th anniversary of military aviation in Indiana.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
Mr. President, I'd ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'd ask now unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it adjourn to then convene for pro forma sessions only, with no business being conducted on the following dates and times, and that following each pro forma session, the Senate adjourn until the next pro forma session. Friday, August 13th at 9:30 a.m., Tuesday, August 17th at 9:30 a.m., Friday, August 20th at 9 a.m., Tuesday, August 24th at 8:30 a.m., Friday, August 27th at 9 a.m., Tuesday, August 31st at 10:30 a.m., Friday, September 3rd at 1:30 p.m., Tuesday, September 7th at 1 p.m., and Thursday, September 9th at 12 noon. I further ask that when the Senate adjourns on Thursday, September 9th, it next convene at 3 p.m. Monday, September 13th. Further, that following the prayer and pledge, the morning hour be deemed expired, the journal of proceedings be approved to date, the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, and morning business be closed. Further, that upon the conclusion of morning business, the Senate proceed to executive session to resume consideration of the Cavall nomination. Finally, that the cloture motions filed during today's session ripen at 5:30 p.m. on Monday, September 13th.
Is there objection? Without objection.
If there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order.
The Senate stands adjourned until Friday, the September 13th? No, Friday the 13th at 9:30 a.m.